It's difficult for me to choose a topic among all the ones that have been mentioned. I'm not exactly an architect, I'm a gardener. So I'm proposing something that I would like to call sharing a signature. And it is to bring out the precedence of what is alive. And whether we're talking about plants, animals, or humans, everything that is living is a co-signatory of the world, and is going to make a change in our garden, in gardens. The buildings that were described by Martin Rauch, they can fall apart, but after hundreds of years. But in fact, they don't. They last, and so that's different from gardens. Gardens, you never know when it's going to die again. It's in a permanent evolution. It changes all the time. So unless you want to keep it exactly the same. But that's very hard to do. Really, it just grows and changes. So I've accepted that it's going to change all along.
Donc le sujet porte.
So the topic is about the precedence of the living and the question of form. For example, this is a garden. For most of you, it's going to be a little piece of free landscape, or maybe wasteland, a mix of plants growing just any old how. But it is a garden. But that's in Vanuatu. And there, things grow very freely. And this amount of diversity is such that there's always something that we can show, whatever day of the year. In our climate, as I'm a gardener, as I say, I have a garden. I'm always impressed that I find something I hadn't seen the day before. This garden has no geometry. The idea is a luscious abundance, and there's no plan with a geometry. We're in a given. We're just letting form happen as it will. But in this case, this is a teaching garden where the idea is over 17 hectares, exactly, to have squares where each square has a different revitalization formula, because the earth there was dead. It was the result of industry, of industrial use of the soil by cultivating maize. And so we had this plan to see what various methods could be used to revitalize. However, it didn't work out because the politicians changed and the project was abandoned. I think it would be great to do it one day, to bring back life into wasteland, into soil that's been destroyed by industrial farming. And the best formula would be to do it in the most natural way possible, or to do it organically. But so far we haven't managed to convince anyone to do it on that sort of scale because of agro-industry. However, there was a lady who wanted to drive the tractor and do those, to cultivate things, and there wasn't much logic. But so that project didn't work out. And now another one. The question of form and of something that is going to liberate itself from time, from any time scale.
On est à l'abbaye de Valloires.
This is in the Valloires Abbey, the cloister and the architecture of the building, which is of the Cistercian time, but it burnt and then was rebuilt in the 18th century. So there were, at the time when they rebuilt, they didn't have any particular rules to follow. They just rebuilt their own way. Of course, it's not like rebuilding Notre Dame now. They followed their ideas and they rebuilt in their own terms the old buildings. And apart from that, here, we're not far from the brook. We had this land to manage. It's the moving garden. It's got to be sustainable and it's got a given form. But that's not what is going to lead me. What's my leading feature is the let go and use the space, which looks a bit rigid, but use it differently. But then it depends what you do. If you use some weed killer, you're going to have a very neat area, but that's not what we chose to do. So I'm not going to give you all the details, but it's just to say that I can follow a given form. However, it's not my favorite. What I prefer, there is the abbey again, and it's quite complex. We don't know all the terrain, and we're not quite sure how to treat it. These rules, or not rules, but these methods that we're trying to develop can be applied also to urban territories, such as here. You know where that is. We're not far from the Grande Arche and the footbridge, which is probably the only element which has been designed architecturally. Everything else is happy-go-lucky, and people have to walk where it's paved. Otherwise. But unfortunately, that garden was destroyed because of building the arena, which is so ridiculous. When I put clouds, it's just because I'm changing from one subject to another. I was quite struck when I visited a park in New Zealand to see that people who drew the road found that the trees were so important that even the yellow line in the middle follows the bumps of where the trees encroach onto the road. I don't know whether I would have had that idea. It's great, but it's only for cyclists and pedestrians. It's the Biennial of Landscape, which I've been preparing for 2 years, which I was preparing for 2 years up to July. I proposed this diagram, and it gives an idea of what you do when you're functional to go from A to B and efficient. The land is flat, it's around Bordeaux, south of Bordeaux. So, of course, the quickest is a straight line. But if you go in a straight line, you have a pond, which has a lot of biodiversity, which has also some clumps of woods, and all that is important for animals, and they don't want to be moved out. So the idea was that a curve would be much better. I'm not talking about a zigzag, but it's just one curve. So we get from A to B quite quite easily. However, today, speed and profitability are so important that one doesn't always do things which are sustainable and which take into account biology and life. And that gave rise to a study on the 55,000 hectares of Bordeaux. It was, so the title we chose was Precedents of the Living, and I kept that title for the biennial. And it's part of it's really part and parcel of our intentions. It's to preserve the living and not to give priority to efficiency and to saving time, particularly when it's a disaster for biodiversity. It means a lot of change in people's minds, and that is everywhere in the world, you know. This year we weren't allowed to sprinkle in gardens, but we were allowed to in golf clubs. So everyone who had gardens found that really scandalous. Not allowed to water your own garden. Maybe in California they know about the gardens going yellow, but we're not used to it. And so there are some. Do you know there are some companies that have offered to paint your grass green, and one of them has come to France. We're really going crazy.
When I went to Japan, I saw that once when I visited, and I was really very much interested. I was doubting very much to go to that country. You know, I have traveled much more to the southern hemisphere instead of the northern hemisphere because everyone wanted to go there. And then I realized, you know, it was great because they accepted the grass not going to be green. You know. Gardener is very respected. Probably he's very well paid too. And here it's Zovia, which is a gramineate, and during all the winter time it's yellow, but in the summertime it gets green. It's wonderful. And at the same time, you know, all this pace it changes with the color, and then they cut and prune all the trees, and there is a whole new atmosphere. I don't know if we would be ready to accept this. So this is a picture taken from my house. I cannot get to have zosia there because that's not a Mediterranean climate, but that's in the summertime. There is, you know, you can see that it's been raining. Sometimes it's yellow, sometimes with some light it becomes a bit reddish. It's strange, but, you know, it's just like you accept malls, but then I have accepted this. And for that garden, I decided what I wanted. It was a garden. I didn't want a house, but I was forced to build a house because there was no house there. So I made it with my hands. This is a small parenthesis which is related to the architecture in your work, which I have decided to show you. That architecture is not very interesting, but that's where I lived during 2 years to make the first part of the house, which is very small because otherwise I wouldn't have made it. And where is Martin? Martin Rauch. Oh, yes. There is no clay. I do not have any clay. Not at all. It's a pity, really. I couldn't make a brick. It's only granite, which is very porous. The soil is granitical sand, which is something that really filters. And right under that layer, there is a very, very, very small layer of clay, which is not even, that stinks. So this is a very, very, very poor soil. So I took bricks. This is a big picture taken from far away. If you see it from close, if you take a closer look, it's stones that I collected. I also sort of have them. I bought some, and some. Well, I almost stole them because people were building houses with concrete bricks, and so I was given these leftover or sort of little stones, and I made that little by little, and I couldn't make all the joints, so I took really and I made, with little shale stones to make the joints, and then there are some claddering on the roof. And you can see on this picture all the plants that are flowering. There is a lot of freedom to, species that come here. It's like poppies and all the flowers that are coming here, like marigolds and things like that. And I keep some of them, and sometimes I take off those that bother me. This is subtraction gardening. I have not put anything. I just take them away from time to time. Then here they see the yellow mulleins. They come because the moles have come. The mole that everybody hates, of course. And I have wanted to make a mole garden in Switzerland. It didn't really work. And they say, well, we already have some. But I said, it's too bad, because otherwise you have the little more houses. And then all the seeds will come back they will come to the surface of the soil. So there is an enormous diversity. And suddenly, thanks to the sun and the lights, several species appear that were buried. There was sort of sleeping. In Lausanne in 2018, I made a solar clock, because the mole comes up like 3 times a day, in the morning at 7 o'clock, at 12 o'clock, noon, and then in the evening also. I had that was one of my customers who told me that, one of my clients, he had his gun to kill them, so he was waiting for them. So that's just to see the diversity of the soil. It's exactly the same that the one you have on the top. So I started to work on my little garden that you have seen before, many years before. When I was a child at my parents, we were looking at moth, and also we were looking at trying to looking at the caterpillars and the way they evolve. When you destroy one species, it's not only the species that you destroy the whole ecosystem. So that caterpillar gives this moth, this butterfly, but the corn culture kills everything, and that has given this plants. This is the Caucasian berce. It's enormous. It seeds from one little seed, and then it moves. And one day it comes in a very straight passage. And I said, what do? I want it, I keep it, so I will make my little path in another way. I change the shape. The question of the shape with which I started is very important, because in the more traditional gardens, you respect it and you repeat it. But here, no, not at all, because since the seed will fall on the soil, but it will not necessarily germinate there. It will be transported by an animal, by a bird, and then the shape will change, and then it goes somewhere else. With the dog, you can see the scale. The plant grows very much. You have something which is temporary, yearly, but it makes that you don't have the same vision one year to the other. So this is called the moving garden. It's very attractive. It's very interesting also from an ecological point of view. The first thing it was applied, it was in the André Citroën Park in Paris in the 15th Oh, you don't see anything. Well, it's a little bit, it's not very clear. Well, in this part, where all the rest has been designed in a very strong architectonic shape with a very rectangular empty space in the center and then little gardens on the sides. This is very much built, very much designed. There were another landscaper, 2 architects and myself. It was like if it had been like 3 architects and a gardener. So we, the sort of shape that was given, that's all. That dates back from 1992 when it was inaugurated. So the shape was not so clear. Today it has changed a little bit, but it gives you the shape that it has today, seen from the top. Gardens that have certainly places that are closed. That's the definition of a garden, which means something which is closed, but with inside of each of them something which is related with the possibility of movement. All the species that have been planted, and the designer, he is there in the part of the moving garden, not in the rest. He is the one who decides to make the curve, to take some plants that to take away some plants that he doesn't consider as being very important, to leave others. It seems to be easy to do, but it's not so easy to make. So it's and there again the shape changes, and you can see that here there are many authors. I have made the proposal of the flowers. It was planted and it grew, but not everything grew, and that's nature, that science. That's the first signature that we have. And then you have the person who maintains and gardens and the whole thing. That person is very important. So that's another author, another signature that you have. And as I was saying before, if we wanted to have a different shape every year, that would be absolutely crazy. So that changes all the time. And there, I think we should take some trees away. So, people walk along. It's not, it changes all the time, The planetary garden, it's the vision, as I've just shown it, but planetary garden, it comes from the planet because there is everything circulates. It comes from inside. It circulates all the time. It moves all the time. Plants travel with animals in a sort of digestive tract. Maybe they need to, maybe when the bird has eaten the cherry here and then throws the seed somewhere else, it's incredible. The idea of having indigenous species does not correspond to life and to the history of planet, except when there are limits of biomas. I mean, climatic limits. A plant which is used to temperate climate will not live in a desert or barren land or iced, but it could live in another continent also in a moderate climate. So the planetary garden, it's this idea of this planetary mix of this, this mix that has existed since the very first garden, the first nomad that settles, brings with him or her that little seed that is brought from somewhere else, and it transports the plants, and we do exactly the same thing. We do it faster and faster. Let's say, for example, look at potatoes, the Kartoffel. They do, that's the way you say it in German. Well, potatoes. I'm trying to look for other words in other languages, but in Germany, in Austria, in Romania, there are potatoes. It does not come from land. It comes from around the Titicaca Lake. It's been kind of recent. It's been done artificially. We accelerated something which is a mechanism that has always been existing. So we're there in this design in what is the thickness of living. These are the limits of biosphere, maybe 11,000 meters above the level of the sea, and that what enables it to live, it's water. Without water, there is nothing, absolutely nothing. Here there is water, there is conditions of condensation in this room, but if they existed, they would be missed, and we have water everywhere in our body, and we get rid of it. There are clouds, it circulates around the planet, and we are in sort of a big washing machine, and that's the planetary garden. Here you see the people who build their houses here. It's the island of Reunion, the Reunion Island. They imagine they are not in the water. Of course they are in water. There is the sea surrounding them, and of course the clouds surrounding them, but there is water in between. And so we are in this situation. I will talk very briefly after. And there we are on the apparent limits of the bioma that constrain plants to remain in one area. It's talking about the Garden of Mayol because we've worked on the Mediterranean bioma on the planet. There is a Mediterranean zona in central Chile, in South Africa, in Australia, and of course around the Mediterranean. And you can see the colors here. And the theoretical continent, it's all these zones that appear here with colors that every time correspond to a climatic area. And we can say that these are the only limits that do exist for living beings, humans, because humans, go through all the bioma's limits. They get dressed, and it's like a prosthesis, they can get cold, they can get warm. That's not a problem, but that's for humans and not for animals. The domaine du Rayol is by the sea with landscapes that are inspired by these climatic areas in the world, but with plants that are around this large axis that can be identified. This is just like Mexico, very warm, dry, subtropical. This is Australia with what they used to call black boys. They burn. These are plants that are fire resistant. There we are in New Zealand. This is still the Domaine du Rayol. Here we are in Chile with the Puya. So there is a landscape identity that appears in every place, but what we want to say is that there is this diversity, the possibility to live under the same climate. Even there are plants that do not look alike, but they can all live together and all are purified. They live with fire. They need fire to regenerate and sometimes even smoke, so you need to have a fire for that. And that's an incredible world. And after the way it's been managed in a Mediterranean garden, it's need to garden it a little bit with little fire, but being careful because it's not. The idea is not to set the garden on fire. In Domaine de Rayol, what they do, they heat material. They put the seeds of the cysts. It's a beautiful plant, but if there's no fire, it will not bloom. And so, like that, it can germinate and then bloom. But there are other ways in other areas to introduce a sort of management that will be very interesting because it's not. Here it's a park, an 8-hectare park in the city of Lyon, and what happens in this biodiversity, which is managed just like a private garden, it's pruning and cutting with sort of everything that has been cut, mowed, it's given to the sheep. So the mowing is done within the city of Lyon. That's possible. And then here we have the sheep. They are very nice. They're very easy to grow and to breed. You know, they don't request much maintenance. And there are too many of them. Well, they go to another park. So with what we have with these gardening methods in that park, animals, the mowings that are used to cover the soil, and then we have the mulch that we put also on the orchard and the compost. They do not input anything because all this organic material that is thrown away, which is stupid because it's always organic material, it's very expensive at the end of the day. So there we have a group of students that are talking to the sheep. That's kind of nice. So the question of management is really very important. And I also say that the sheep are also the co-authors of it. The soil that we would have to spend much time to make an analysis, but the substrate on which plants can be planted, it's very strange, and sometimes you just wonder how it works. And even here on concrete, it works. There is always a floristic series that can be adapted on any kind of soil, even if it's very strange. For example, on macadam, you have roots that grow and push the macadam. And here it's in Saint-Nazaire, in the harbor. That's the roof of part of the harbor that you have here. I made a proposal in this first part. This is a casemate. This is, that's the submarine base. That was the only part that was finished, because when the war ended, they had not finished to build the base, the submarine base. So it's still sort of unfinished, because you can see the beams haven't been placed, and there is a third part where there is nothing. And it's a little, the garden of the third landscape. It's the space where nothing has been done. So that's the diversity that was installed in that first part that were not covered. Oh, that's weird. Well, that's not it. I'm sorry. And from this part that we're coming, the bursting chambers, we have a very beautiful tree which trembles. It's a beautiful tree, and an aspen, and then there is always a floristic series that can resist to a soil which is just a sort of stone soil, nothing. And so we took the stones from the Loire, which is right there. So there is all the remaining architecture where we've planted all that, and another part where nothing has been done. And time has gone. You know, this is a picture that was taken several years ago. And then there is also a botanic class with a professor that comes, and they put labels everywhere. So we've called it the label garden. So sometimes, the plants die, and there's only the labels that are right there. And that's why we called it the labels garden. So that's topic is the topic of the plants that grow by themselves. It's been developed on a very scenographic way in the Matisse Park in Lille, in the north of France, in all this area that you can see here, which has the shape of an island that exists at the other end of the city of Lille. An island, which is a play on words in France, Lille and Lille, It's a little bit on top of the street level. So it's the same project that was square. And there I'm talking to the architects here. It was square, and I am told you cannot do a square architecture because this is very military. We are on the old forts of Vauban of the city of Lille, but it has disappeared. It has been erased. I didn't want to do something military, but the heritage architects didn't like it. So it took us a long time to find the shape, and thanks to Claude Courtecuisse, who knew the existence of that island, that we could find it. And that's it. That's the result, at the beginning, in a sort of a hill full of remains, and we put the supports on the side, and we just dumped all this, and that was the result. And all the surface is covered. It's the plain surface. It's covered with vegetation that came by itself. It's like a little. It's like a natural garden with white willows. But there was social buildings behind who were complaining because they say it looked like barren land before. A wasteland, and they wanted to get rid of that part. It was too expensive to get rid of that part of the architecture that was really heavy and all the hills, so they planted trees to hide. It was absolutely stupid. So I have a meeting in November with the city of Lille, the green spaces department, and I will go there with my saw just to cut, because I wanted to accept this natural, spontaneous diversity that grows very strongly, that accepts insects, birds saying, we need this, but not that only. But even in the heart of the city, you can have a beautiful landscape. I have done other operations, just like this one where you can see a sort of wood plate, which is sort of inserted in the rock, where you can sit down and observe the evolution of that landscape. Almost a century ago, it was completely cultivated. It's face, horizontal with little terraces, and it was full of cultures. You cannot imagine that today. Today, it's been covered with woods, it's been abandoned, and the rural desertification, it's not there. But it's a richness by the same token, of course, with forests and wonderful biodiversity, which is due to the fact that nothing has been done there. And to the students, when I meet them sometimes, maybe here, I don't know, I tell them in our office, in our job as gardeners, our landscape designers, if we don't do anything, we are useful for everyone. There are not many jobs where you can do that. And if you don't do anything, you let a forest grow, and that would be exceptional that it wouldn't work, and that makes oxygen, and then everybody is happy. So that's the situation. The forest covered is bigger than the one that existed a century ago. And if it didn't exist, it would be even worse for the climatic evolution. And here, a couple of topics. Here we have, it's a very cultural, it's the garden of the Museum of the Quai Branly. When I had to do that project, I was thinking of the kind of cultures they were talking about, and every time there was the turtle that came back, talking about the Asia, where it's completely cosmophores, where there is the one, or even in Africa, where people, guilty people, sit on seats that have a turtle shape, or even in Latin America, where they, the villages where they live, it's rounded like a turtle. So that was oval shaped. I talked about that with Jean Nouvel, who accepted the idea that the roof of the restaurant would be oval-shaped, but then all the garden was built following this idea. There is no straight geometry. There you have the design, you have that gives you an idea with all the different objects, the stones that have collected in a lava quarry in Volvic, where they had the right shape here, the largest terrace, which is turtled shaped, then the entrance, the gazebo, which is turtle-shaped, and there are inclusions in the soil with animals, plants that have sort of an animistic vision of the world. My idea was doing something that did not look like an Occidental, a Western garden. A Western garden, you have grass, and you mow the grass, and that's it. This is more a sort of bushy savanna with gramineas and things that grow, and here we have plants that are gramineous. So this is the garden of the Museum of the Quai Branly. All the composition is based on a symbolic charge, but the management is technological. It's not that easy because it's companies that take care of that, and it depends on the way they do it. So pedagogy, so there are several schools and high schools where I have talked, and now they don't need me anymore, talking in different places, in Westlands, and where people did not have money, just a couple of tools and a few days by weekend. And, their work is after transmitted to the next promotion, so it's a kind of interest. It's near Nantes, they make installations and, things that go and change. It's not important. What is important is, to have all the biodiversity, to show how it can be, taken into account. At the beginning, it was only bushes and and machines that also come in order to see, we are going to have a garden there and not, and it changes all the time. And they have managed to do some sculpture. What was showed before by architects, there were elements there where some sculpture could be done. That's a plant that everybody hates, because it's very thorny. It's called gorse, and then a labyrinth, which is funny to do, and then the next promotion comes to see how the others play with it and just check if they haven't done, they haven't got it wrong, and even made a sort of Christmas card with that picture, and I thought it was really nice. It was a couple of years ago, or 3, and I thought it was really cute. And I will finish with 2 things. With this enormous circle that we are doing now, it's also pedagogical. It is intended for youngsters who are doing this part that Claude Nicolas Ledoux had built, but he only built half of it. There were the buildings for the workers with the little gardens, and all the management was there, and the salt came by a salt duck, and it was worth gold, And what is gold today? If we are talking about a project like that, that's biodiversity, because it's in danger right now. So we are trying to really present it here in all these gardens with a culture which is organized by the management of the salt mine. And here a series of projects which are proposed by the youngsters that have been selected after a contest. And I have asked to have a contest here, and, talking to them as if they were bear cubs that were completely mixed. Today we have global warming, grizzly and polar bears meet. And of course, they're suffering because they have to change their surroundings, and they have little cuts. You know, they haven't done it in many years. And the babies, the little cuts, they are born in that context, and everything is fine. And these are the ones that teach their parents how to be able to survive. So I say, well, that's wonderful. You are doing gardens. You come out from the schools. The topic here is climatic change. So you are really, you know, mixed people here, so you're going to teach us how to do it. So that was inaugurated in July. It's still under construction, I would say. It's in a kind of extraordinary place. It's an utopian vision on the way workers would work. But today it's a cultural center. There are really conferences, meetings. It's a very beautiful place. And the end is this, that's it. The water. I started with this, with the planetary garden. I was doing studies from the water that was stemming out from the Mont Gerbier des Joncs to go to Ardèche. 2.5 months after a drought year in October, everything had been burnt, very little water, and finally everybody was complaining. It is said that the Loire River is born there in the Mont Gerbier des Joncs. Well, I said, fine. I went, so I climbed. And I arrived almost at the top, and there was just a little drop of water. And I said, what is this? This is incredible. It's so dry. It's been dry for 2 months and a half. That's a tourist that has his bottle of water, and no, it's still dripping. And I realized it was like a water trap. That the night humidity comes there and it's concentrated, becomes like little drops of water, and it drips. And that's on the whole relief, on the whole course, that becomes really you know, it's a spring here, and I decide that the Loire does not come here, and I talk about that. The person wanted to have installation that were artistic installation on that line that were the waters divide on the water divide place, and I was a little bit shocked with that because I thought that it was not the sort of spring of the La Loire, you know. I thought it was not exactly there. I thought the Loire, the water was dripping everywhere. And I was, you know, I thought of that, and I made this drawing, and I said, do you think we can collect water with such an instrument? He said, well, you know, it could work. That was not very useful, but not sure that we can collect a lot of water, but let's try it. So it's very easy, you know, it's only, it's all dry stone walls, and we collect all the little drops of water. It was built in a few months by a team that have worked beautifully, and after the end of that work, it was still very dry, and after 1 month, the whole basin was full of water, and that is drinking water. That's just an idea, you know. It was not absolutely a place in France where they lack of water, even if it's in the region of Ardèche, where it's really dry. Of course, okay, there is the climate change, but it's just to say that probably we are going to move forward to the need to manage water differently, you know, like managing our lives differently, and we are going to have to find means, and that's a means. Of course, there are other, maybe you know the nets on which the humidity gets condensed in Chile, in Churungo, So, and we have the cloud gardener that accelerates the water on the nets, and this mesh of the nets is inspired by the leaf of a tree, which is called the weeping tree, which is on the slopes of the area where it never rains, and that works really beautifully. So I wanted to talk about that and finish with it because it's a crucial topic. We cannot live without water. That's it. Thank you very much.